going and try to get our business done within the next hour. So with no further ado, I'd like to call the June 24th meeting of the City of Charleston Committee on the Bike Ped Committee to order. And as is our custom, begin with a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Okay, so Keith, I'm going to turn this over to you to sort of run the show. I think Sharon and her team are first up, or we have public comment first up. I don't have the agenda in front of me.
We do have one public comment that we received. So I do want to make sure I say that for the record.
Right.
And then I can follow your lead on giving introductions with Sharon and her team, and then the Open Streets discussion. Hi, everybody. We had one public comment from Arthur, who is at 36 Charlotte Street. I'm gonna just summarize. He wrote both to myself and actually to Ms. Zimmerman. And he iterated that he wanted to see a better start to bicycle infrastructure on the peninsula, had iterated that he had saw that Brigade Street and also the SU River Bridge bike ped that had been funded. But he referenced the citywide transportation plan, which was, he says, August 2018 approved, which included the People Pedal Plan, as you all know, and wanted to highlight specific potential projects within the People Pedal Plan that could be considered for investment as a phase one build out. He mentions a north-south route of King Street North, Mount Pleasant, Morrison to Line Street. Also an east-west route, Carolina, Fishburne, Lockwood to Ashley River Bike Ped Bridge, and also Lockwood and B Streets. And iterated that the construction of these as an initial start will begin to build out the network from there. So wanted to make sure that I put that comment on the record.
Great, thank you.
Per the council members' request on last meeting, and with all the varying different meetings and conversations and public outreach that are happening, I'm in agreement with this request. It was asked to come before you all with a quick update on the Low Country Rapid Transit project, first mass transit system coming to our area, significant project connecting Somerville into downtown, and has great influence on the things that we talk about on a regular basis on this committee with bike ped access. And so glad to have the COG here, glad to have HDR here. I'm glad to have Alta, who I've worked with both in this capacity, but also in my previous positions. So just glad to have them on board and give you all a quick glimpse, not just into the Low Country Rapid Transit, for those of you who might not be familiar with this project and how influential this will be to our region, but also how bike and ped infrastructure play into it. I would argue, outside of the 526 conversation, we'll set that to the side, that this project and the bike and pedestrian bridge are the most pivotal projects coming not just to our region, but to the state, and our stakes in the sand about how we think about transportation. So definitely tune in if you haven't heard about this before, and definitely want to leave some time for a few questions.
All right, so Sharon, are you going to take the lead with your team and get us going?
Yes, I will. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow our experts in the bike ped arena to walk us through a presentation. But I wanted to just kick us off to say thanks for inviting us to join this committee. It's really perfect timing as we start to move forward with our detailed analysis of the recommended alternative. Bike ped facilities will be critical in terms of what they look like and how we connect to the transit station. So I have with me from HDR, Shannon Meter, Jorge Luna, and David Montgomery, and they're going to kind of give an update on where we are with the overall project. And then members from the Alta team can introduce themselves, which I think many of you are probably already familiar. We'll talk about what we're planning and what we're thinking for the bicycle and pedestrian facilities along this corridor, really to hopefully get your questions and some input. So as we start to design these facilities, we're taking everything into consideration that we need to be thinking about. So I'm not sure if you want Shannon to share her PowerPoint presentation or if there's someone else that will drive it, but I can turn that over to her.
And Sharon, before we continue, just please let everybody know what your role is in this, because you do play a very key and pivotal role.
I am the overall project manager with Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester Council of Governments for the Low Country Rapid Transit. So all things regarding to this project, I'm overseeing with the help of a lot of other experts that I'm not expertise in. So.
Right. Okay, thanks. All right, so who's going to take over from here?
Shannon should be able to share her screen and go from there.
Okay, Shannon, you're on.
Is everybody able to hear me and see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks y'all for having us. We have just a brief PowerPoint here to run through with you. Really, our purpose in chatting with y'all today is to help.
My name is Najima Davis Washington, and you are watching my live feed as it relates to my work in bicyclist and pedestrian safety, a transportation issue with the city of Charleston. I am a member of the bicyclist and pedestrian safety subcommittee.
Hey Keith, can you mute that?
The transportation committee for the city council. And we are having a meeting which is live streamed right now. And I'm just going to share some of the meeting. It is available on YouTube. And I just encourage you to watch along. And there'll be certain times when I pause and certain times when I come back to directly me. And there's sometimes when I will share the meeting directly with everyone. So thank you so very much for tuning in. All right, we are going to get started. The meeting has begun. We are listening to Shannon Merder, I believe, M-E-D-E-R. She is sharing the Low Country Rapid Transit presentation for the committee meeting. Okay, great. Let's go.
Najima, can you mute yourself, please? All right. Let's see how this goes.
All right. Can everybody still hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So a couple of things that we wanted to make sure we covered today with y'all, and certainly answer any other questions that you may have along the way. We wanted to give a quick review of some of the goals and objectives for connecting bike and ped on the LCRT project. We wanted to go over and just talk briefly about some of the opportunities and constraints that we're seeing in the corridor, and then also review with you our draft proposed plan for bike ped connectivity. We've just wrapped up the draft of that plan, and so you all will be among some of the first group to hear about what we have in that. And then also talk about the next steps on the overall project for advancing not just bike and ped, but also the project itself. So quick reminder, we are in the project development phase of the project, and for an FTA transit project, what that means is that they have a process in place when you are competing for federal money. And so we are competing and within a project development phase under the Capital Investment Grant Program of FTA. And that's really highlighted here on this slide. We are at the very beginning stage of that overall process, about 6 months into a 24-month schedule, and have 3 major milestones that we're looking at completing in project development. And that includes completing NEPA documentation, which is the environmental document for the project that FTA will review. We are completing a 30% level of design on a preferred alternative. And then we are also requesting or completing an application to request entry into engineering, which is the next big phase of the investment grant program. We're looking at having that work complete for this phase of the project next year in the fall. That is when we have to have our application into engineering submitted and approved to enter that next phase. So like most projects that are competing for federal money or going through a federal process, we have a purpose and need that we have set for the project that we really are using to guide everything that we're doing on the project. And so those include along the top here of this screen, improving mobility and overall connectivity in the region, making sure that we have a cost-effective, accessible transit alternative in mind that we're trying to develop, and then ensuring that we're supporting land use and transit objectives for the whole region. And then below that are some of the goals and objectives that we've set in place for the project to really guide some of our measures and metrics as we go through planning and the design process. So I have Jorge Luna on with us today. He's our planning lead, and he's gonna set up where we are with our recommendation on the alignment for LCRT, and then talk through some of the specifics relative to bike and ped goals. So Jorge, I'm gonna let you take it over from here, and I'll keep driving the presentation if that's okay.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Shannon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Just wanted to go over the recommended alignment based on the purpose and need of the project and the goals and objectives that were developed. We evaluated several alignments, and the recommended alignment that we've shared and we've been sharing and gathering input from the community is alignment 1, originating in Somerville, traveling down Rivers Avenue, continuing through the King Street extension, down Meeting Street to Calhoun Street, heading west into the medical district there in the peninsula. This is the strongest overall corridor in terms of overall ridership, minimizing the number of railroad crossings. The cost per rider overall was quite effective for this alignment itself. It connects to a number of employment areas, and also the operating expense was quite reasonable in terms of the comparison of all the other routes. You get to see in the inset there sort of the alignment in downtown Charleston as part of the overall map. Next slide, please. So that's the alignment, and related to the goals overall for goals for bike and pedestrian connectivity. As part of this effort, we want to provide safe accommodations for bicyclists and pedestrians along the Low Country Rapid Transit corridor overall. And in this effort right now, we're proposing to connect with bike and ped improvements from the peninsula all the way to Rivers Avenue, University Boulevard, north of the study area. The intent also is for the bike and ped effort to be a catalyst for future bicycle and pedestrian improvements along the corridor itself, be able, if you will, to branch out for future improvements and be able to connect to the bike and ped improvements proposed for the Low Country Rapid Transit effort. And lastly, effectively connect bicycle and pedestrian network to station areas overall. So what does this mean in terms of the alignment? So as you saw, there's one single alignment that we've identified. And these are, if you will, the cross sections of how the roadway would be modified to serve and be able to connect with the Low Country Rapid Transit effort. Going from north to south, from Somerville into the peninsula, along the North Area 1 from Somerville, it would be the BRT would be traveling mixed traffic. As we start getting into the Trident Health area, we would have peak direction reversible lanes traveling in the median. And as we head into the center area to North Charleston to about the neck area, we would have center running BRT. And as you see, both northbound and southbound direction, we would have a BRT serving that facility there. And pertinent to our conversation here, as we're entering to the neck area, we would be traveling, as I said, on the King Street extension, connecting into the peninsula via mixed traffic, and in the peninsula area itself, on Meeting in Calhoun to the medical district, it would be peak hour reversible lane traveling overall in that area. Next slide, please. And here I'm going to hand over to Kat Maines. She is with Alta Planning, and we'll be focusing, if you will, more pertinent to this body, the improvements in what is planned for the neck area and the peninsula area. Kat?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you again for giving us the time and opportunity to show you what we've been working on. We're excited to show you and get your thoughts on everything. So I'm going to start with a couple of diagrams, just kind of showing you the alignment of what we're looking at, and then we'll show a cross section to kind of show a little bit more detail in terms of what that alignment represents. We understand that BCD-COG, in conjunction with its implementation partners, really wants to implement a continuous, comfortable bikeway in addition to comfortable walkways along the length of this LCRT route. And so this proposed route shows a shared use path alignment that we're considering as sort of the parallel route for the transit alignment. So I'm going to start with the diagram on the right side of the slide here. Kind of the north side of that diagram is around Cosgrove Ave, and through that area, the shared use path would be on the northbound side of the street. So that's kind of the northeast side of the street there. And it would continue down Rivers Ave and King Street extension there. And then if you transition to the diagram on the left side, the side path would transition from the northbound side of the street over to the southbound side at Disher Street. And then it would continue down, so it would be on the opposite side of where those rail lines are on King Street extension, instead adjacent to the businesses that are there and some of the redevelopment that's occurring. We're also noting Sproul Ave on this map, which we understand is, has existing bike lanes and has had some recent improvements done to it. And especially as you go further to the north is an important connection for neighborhoods. That's going to be something we keep in mind as we think about our station area connectivity. Next slide. There's a little bit more going on in this one, so I'm going to go through it. This shows more of the peninsula area of where that alignment is going to be. So in the very top of this diagram, you see the blue line. That's the continuation of that side path on King Street extension. And we see this opportunity with the low line coming in as well as sort of an opportunity to take advantage of that really high comfort bikeway that's going in there. Curious to get y'all's thoughts on that when there's time, but the idea is that the bikeway would transition to the low line from the side path there at Morrison Drive and Mount Pleasant Street, continue on down south, and then reconnect to Meeting Street where the current portion of the low line ends. The bikeway concept would continue down Meeting Street, and this area is significantly more constrained than other parts of the corridor we're looking at. Charleston is a unique area, especially in the peninsula. There's tight right-of-way and lots of pedestrian activity going on, and historical resources that are non-negotiables in terms of moving them. So while the LCRT route is going to continue down Meeting Street and down Calhoun Street, there really isn't a great way to accommodate a comfortable bikeway on those streets without significant investment and traffic lane removal, essentially road diets and changing the way traffic operates there. We understand Calhoun Street is one of the busier streets in terms of getting people in cars into and out of the peninsula. So we are considering some options for how to accommodate bicyclists on Calhoun Street. We understand that regardless of what infrastructure is built elsewhere, Calhoun Street is still likely to have some bicyclists using it. So we're considering some options for how to either make great shared lanes on Calhoun Street, sharing with the transit vehicles and general traffic. And then also some other options that potentially change traffic a little bit. We know that in the People Pedal Plan, there was a cycle track designated for that route. So we're considering the feasibility of how that could potentially be accommodated and what impacts to traffic that would look like. In addition to that, we're also looking at a parallel route option. I think B Street and Radcliffe are kind of the logical option. B Street already has lots of walking and biking activity on it. To the west of where this diagram is showing, it will continue onto that bicycle and pedestrian bridge project over the Ashley River. And in addition, the city has already kind of gone ahead and started looking at some concept design of what that would look like that Alta has been helping on. So we see that as kind of an obvious solution and maybe having less of an impact than what would need to be done on Calhoun in order to accommodate a really great bikeway. Next slide. So this is the short-term cross-section for really the typical of most of the corridor. This is not going to be what it looks like along Meeting Street or Calhoun likely. This is really more north of where it connects from the low line. But we are aiming for a 10-foot shared use path with a 5-foot minimum planting buffer. This is consistent with what national guidance says it should be the case for mixed bicycle and pedestrian travel. And in places where the speed limits allow and the clear zone regulations allow, that buffer could have trees in it. It might be wider in some places where there is additional right of way, and that can be accommodated. I think with both the shared use path width and the planting buffer width, we want to get maximum width possible, but 10-foot and 5-foot is kind of the typical that will be part of the design throughout the corridor. Next slide. And then this shows kind of one of what we see as many, many options in terms of how that short-term cross-section could be evolved over time. It could be widened to 12 to 14 feet, or as is shown here, the modes of walking and biking could actually be separated from one another. So in this configuration, the initial shared use pathway is instead designated as a bidirectional bike lane, and there's an additional sidewalk and buffer between those. This might be something that's appropriate where there's long stretches of redevelopment and there's a lot of activity, and it just doesn't make sense to have bicyclists and pedestrians doing the same thing. But overall, we think there's lots of different ways that cross-section could be evolved in the future. And perhaps most importantly is getting it onto both sides of the street where we're only able to get it on one side of the street today. So just all to say that, we are committed to getting this continuous shared use path throughout where the transit improvements are going to be made. But that does not preclude future improvements from happening along the corridor as well. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jorge to talk us through some next steps.
Awesome. Thank you. Very interesting. Okay, Jorge, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
The virtual floor.
Great, thank you. So in terms of next steps, as you see there, we'll be presenting the overall final recommendations, this alignment recommendation to the BCD-COG board. There's still a lot of work to be done in terms of testing and refining the alignment to be able to make sure that we're effective and competitive for the Federal Transit Administration Capital Investment Grant Program. Again, this is a federal program that we have to meet certain targets and be able to show a cost-effective and good project to get a good rating and request federal support for funding the overall project. We will continue as part of the transit-oriented development effort as well to refine station areas and advance a TOD study. And this bike and ped effort will be, as you saw earlier in the presentation, to connect effectively to those station areas for permeability overall to connect to the station areas and also connect to the LCRT vehicles themselves, of course. And then for bicycle and pedestrians, we'll refine the overall network for the recommendations and include them in the design criteria, and walking, biking access to stations report that we're working with Alta, Kat, and John there at Alta assisting us in that effort. This will include high priority projects summarizing existing conditions, stationary bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. With that, I believe that summarizes the next steps. And Shannon or Sharon, anything else before we open for questions?
I'll just wrap up by saying that we are really just starting this bike ped component, so this is a great time to really hear feedback on what we need to be thinking about as we start to look at this.
Okay, well, first off, on behalf of the committee and as the chairman, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to give us this briefing. This is a project that, as I think Sharon will tell you, is near and dear to my heart as city council member, as chairman of CARTA, as a member of the committee overseeing this, but more importantly, as someone who believes that we need to really look at public transit in this community, and this is the project that's going to really help us do that. Sharon, before I open it up to questions from the committee, I would like to ask you, just because I don't think we've ever talked about this, in terms of your overall budget, is there a breakdown as to what percentage or portion of that can be allocated to the design and implementation of bike ped facilities, or is that just something you all integrate as you go along?
We integrate it as we go along, but we can certainly share with you what we expect it will be for this corridor, if that would be helpful. But it's not really, they didn't really identify this percentage goes toward bike ped. It really depends on the corridor.
I think from this committee's perspective, that's something we're of course interested in, and you know, want to, you know, encourage and help in any way that we can the inclusion and integration of any bike ped facilities that go along. And of course, you know, the fact that you all are using resources and putting resources towards it is a very helpful fact for us.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can certainly share that information.
Okay, so with that, I might ask Sharon if you unshare your screen and we can sort of put everybody up on the Hollywood squares here. Thank you. 3 months of Zoom, I'm getting better at all this. So we have a very active committee, as you'll probably imagine, and I'm just going to open up the floor to any questions that you might have. Free shot at the team that's putting together really the most important large-scale public transit project in the history of this region. So have at it. Who's got a question? Huh.
I'll
Okay.
go.
All right, great. Gervais, thank you.
Yeah, is there one thing in particular that we could do, one hurdle that's in the way? I mean, anything as this committee that could help move your project along?
I would say that as we are working through a lot of constraints in the corridor as it relates to bicycle and pedestrian facility, really having your input and really understanding what those priorities are will be very helpful for us. And knowing that there will be some compromises we'll have to make along the way, we want to make sure we can get the most out of this project as it relates to that connectivity piece as we can.
I should know that. Are y'all a state or a city organization?
We are regional, so we are the Tri-County region.
So how does that work with city-owned and state-owned roads? Because that's so tough.
That is part and parcel of the complicated portion of this project, and that's why the BCD COG and Sharon are sort of overseeing this, to be able to coordinate all the different member governments as you go through. I mean, you're coming through various counties, through various towns. Lots of jurisdictions have a lot to say about this. And one of the things that I've tried to emphasize through the process of educating people about Low Country Rapid Transit is it's not just a transportation project. It is a project for all sorts of things, including the growth and development of a community through zoning and other things. So there's so many moving parts. That's why it's nice to have a central place for this to work. And if you've never been involved in the BCD COG or been to a BCD COG meeting, if you sit around the table or the virtual table, you see representatives from all over the community. And it's a good place for the share of information and then to get feedback into this project. But it's complicated. One of the things that I don't think anyone touched on, and I do think this is a big part of the bike ped consideration, is that transit-oriented development is a big part of any project like this, and in particular, Low Country Rapid Transit. Building live, work, play nodes and areas, something that we really haven't looked at in this community before because we don't have that transit corridor, is going to change the game and how people move about and in what proximity they live to where they work, where they shop, and where they play. And that will all lend itself, I believe, and we have the experts here to comment on this, to bike ped facilities, both directly tied to this and then connected to this project.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Just a little bit more, just to bail Sharon out a little bit. The BCD COG, a lot of folk reference a term called Metropolitan Planning Organization. And so they stand for all three counties, Dorchester, Charleston, and Berkeley, as the main planning arm to bring all of us together. And so there's a governing body of representatives. I think it's 57, something like that, of members who come together to have discussions about how plans are elevated, what exactly they look like on all different types of forms, whether that's environmental, whether that's transit, whether that's roadway, or otherwise. They're also a major liaison with the state DOT, including with funding for how those pieces move. They're also the hub for what's called the Long Range Transportation Plan, federally stipulated process that ranks all the varying different transportation projects in the region, both by roadway, intersections, corridors, and also bike and pedestrian. So a little bit of a hybrid aspect to ours than other places. Ours also holds our transit agency, CARTA. And so they also simultaneously oversee that, which obviously Chairman Seekins is chair of, which also has representatives from different regions. So it's a major player. It's really what I feel is the glue for all of us at local municipality, county, and state level for how we're having conversations, but also making decisions about what planning looks like in the region.
And it's an excellent question. I mean, a lot of people look at this as it's kind of a mystery. So, all right. Any other questions from the committee? Yes, sir, Dr. Lewin.
Sorry, trying to unmute myself. So for the portion that's not on the peninsula, is it going to be solely a rapid transit lane in a sense? I mean, will the rapid transit use its own lane that's not being used by cars? And if that is the case, is that bike ped adjacent to that just rapid transit area? Meaning, although there's that buffer zone, but there's actually probably more of a buffer zone if it's just the rapid transit and not cars adjacent to it. Does that make sense? That question makes sense?
Yeah, it does. And so for the big chunk of the corridor that operates in its own dedicated lane, it's that piece along Rivers Avenue where we have that center median, that grassy median. And so the lane would be located in that center median, but the bike facilities would be on the sides of the road where they currently are. So they're not in that center median. What we will be creating is crosswalks signalized all throughout that corridor, so that there is a way for people to get across to the stations and have that center median as kind of that safe haven if they can't get across all 8 lanes of traffic that they're trying to get into. Now, when we get into the neck area and the peninsula where we're starting to work in mixed traffic, or have what Jorge described as those reversible lanes, they operate on the sides. So those would be, again, kind of more like a regular travel lane where people are turning right or the buses are going.
This is Matt. Thanks again for the presentation, Sharon and team. So I understand, the stations are going to be on the side of the road as opposed to in the median, right? So the median just has the travel lanes, and then for the bus, and then they would cross part of the street to get on the bus. Is that how that works? Or the bus turns off? Where we
have the center lane, the stations are in the center. Where we have mixed traffic, the stations are on the side. So in most of the peninsula, you're looking at those side stations. But up Rivers Avenue, there'll be center stations, kind of like a light rail you might have seen in other cities. But in mixed traffic, it will be on the side.
Gotcha. And then is there another layer? I'm sure there's another layer to this that looks at zoning and transit-oriented development and how the bike ped will actually leave the corridor and go outward into those communities.
Yep.
You were just not there yet?
Yes, well, we are actually going through that process now. So we're looking at that half-mile station radius for what we call our transit-oriented development studies. So we didn't mention that we do have a public meeting right now on our website that's live, and it introduces the station areas that we're evaluating. And those stations, will continue to screen those down probably to about 20 stations, and we're looking at that transit-oriented development potential as one of the screening criteria, so we can make sure that land use and that connectivity is there to support the transit system as well as some of that growth that's coming in.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from anybody?
Just a quick, because the LCRT team has been amazing. I think you all have now, I've seen this presentation 4 times in the past few weeks, and you guys have been great about letting me ask tons and tons of questions. And just so that the rest of the committee is kind of aware, the most robust bike ped facilities that Kat talked about, expanding outwards in the future, that's going to have to come with that TOD and writing things into zoning overlays and things like that. So that's something that all of us are going to need to make sure that we're engaged in, to make sure that this system continues to grow in a way where people are safe and connected in the ways they need to be to get to the transit systems. And one other side note is, DOT is not helping as far as a road diet goes. So this project could be more robust quicker if a road diet were an option. So it's just sort of a side note that we really need a complete streets bill at the state level to help DOT do better.
Agreed.
Katie,
Sorry, just quick comment on top of that, and I'll turn over. Zoning is going to be a huge part of this, and we're the City of Charleston Bike and Ped Committee, and the City of Charleston is known worldwide for its zoning prowess. That's an interesting word, but we're going to have to share that as we go into North Charleston, that whole area, because zoning will be the card that we have to play if the DOT doesn't quite get to where we want them to be. And how this all integrates transit-oriented development is 100% dependent on successful zoning. And so more to come with that. So you all thought you were on a bike ped committee. You're on a bike ped committee that's really going to look very hard at zoning. The other thing is, Sharon, I just thought I would ask you to comment really quickly, and I'll hand it over to the rest of the committee to ask some more questions about the interplay between the last couple miles and the low line, because I know that's a conversation that is going to be had soon. And I know there's some requests to the city to make some policy decisions on that.
Yes, so as you saw in the presentation, that the low line is what we're considering the bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, but that connection from the low line to the meeting street stations will be critical. So as part of the coordination, we'll be looking at how we can help with those connections to the low line as well. And
for those of you on this committee who have heard that perhaps the low line will be part of the routing of the system, I think it's safe to say, and Sharon, just mute me if I'm going off the rails here, that's not going to happen. Fair statement?
That's correct. We did evaluate that, and we looked at a lot of different criteria, and based on a lot of different factors, the meeting street alternative really made the most sense for the BRT to operate on, not only for a system today, but for future capacity. As we start to grow into a more regional system, it had more capacity for us.
Okay, couple more questions and we're going to get on to open streets. I saw Najima, do you have a question? Oh, we lost her.
Hi, it's Mariana. I had a question.
Right. Okay, yep, yes ma'am.
While we wait on Najima. I'm sorry, I'm outside with some planes flying overhead. Thank you for the presentation, and I'm glad to hear that the low line was next as an option. I think there were some concerns in our committee when we reviewed that about what that would do to the kind of otherwise more peaceful route that was going to be the low line, for lack of a better term. But I'm interested in just a quick question on the vehicles that are going to be running this route. I'm just trying to figure out what that would look like and whether there's an opportunity to add capacity to carry more bicycles on those for people who are commuting to and from the Low Country Rapid Transit corridor.
Absolutely, yes. We are looking at a larger 60-foot, what we call an articulated vehicle. So it has the capacity to carry up to 90 people on a bus. One of the things that you can look at doing is removing some of the seats and providing for bike accessibility on the vehicle as opposed to in the front of the bus. So we will be evaluating as we start to look at the vehicle options. We are looking at potentially an all-electric, battery electric vehicle and evaluating that as well. So as go through that process, we'll look at what that bike demand is and what we can reasonably accommodate on the vehicles. As we design the stations, we're designing stations so that they can provide what we call level boarding. So it's very easy to roll onto the buses with a wheeled vehicle like a bicycle or even a wheelchair or any other kind of rolled vehicle. So we will be going through that evaluation over the next few months.
That's great. Thank you. And what about bike storage at the stops?
Absolutely. That will be a critical piece of the station.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? Another question? If not, I'm going to, on behalf of the committee, thank Sharon and your entire team again for taking time out outside of traditional working hours. I know you're working hard. Give one more plug, Sharon, for getting people out there online and virtually to see the presentation and participate in these difficult times. There's never been a more important time to get involved in your community, and particularly when it comes to this large-scale transit project, which is going to be a reality, and it's going to affect this community in the positive way. And I think this committee has a lot to say about it. So Sharon, thank you. Everybody else, thank you. And Kat, I did notice as we're looking through different bios, I think you and I share one thing in common. We both went to college in the Happy Valley of Central Massachusetts, which I was thinking of fondly today. So thank you for all your work.
Oh, very nice. Glad to be here with you all.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Keith. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about our open streets and where we are with that. We have not, by the way, underline not yet had a traffic and transportation committee following our last committee meeting to present the recommendations of this committee, but we will before we have another bike ped committee meeting. So Keith, with that, I'm going to ask you to briefly let everybody know where we are, and then we'll go from there. Matt, I may need to turn this over to you in about 5 minutes, but I'll let you know. Okay, Keith, have at it.
Thank you. Thank you all for the last few meetings of really digging deep and trying to navigate how we bring something to the city that I think is more than worthwhile and sets a tone for how we use the public right of way. Wanted acknowledging the fact that at the last meeting, you all voted for 3 specific areas to look deeper into. One, the aspect of parklets and opportunities there. 2, the opportunity of South Market Street and the closure between Church and State, which the city does own. And as of yesterday, we officially own all of Market now because of a final portion of South Street towards East Bay that was needed for the eventual streetscape and drainage projects that will be going on there. And then the third piece was Wentworth with the idea of a cycle track that's there. What we wanted to be able to do as staff, we had the subcommittee meeting yesterday. Thank you for those who could attend that, and also have had internal staff meetings. We wanted to give you all a gist of what we found post you all's vote. There was questions asked about the viewpoint of the brick and mortar businesses around South Street, the possibility of Wentworth, what that would take, safety precautions and otherwise, whether or not that would work. And then also the parklet process and what that could ideally be if that was something that was implemented. From a staff standpoint, we definitely believe that South Street should continue to be a recommended option to come out of this committee to TNT. And we also agree with the aspect of the parklet process in specific ways. And I want to let Meg and Alan take both of these pieces and give you some additional information. Our hope is that with this additional information, one, that you all can solidify what your recommendation would be to traffic and transportation. And then we would ask chairs, co-chair, to codify that recommendation into something that's digestible for the Traffic and Transportation Committee. Staff have put some of these documentations together already in anticipating of being of supportive, and then talk through what that looks like for the next committee meeting. So I'm going to ask Meg to, per you all's request, you wanted a surveying of the businesses. She got to all of them. And did an amazing job reaching out there. So has some really great information to share around that, but also some questions to make sure you all know about. And then we'll let Alan jump into the aspects of the design pieces specific to the 3 areas and the 2 that we feel as a staff, at least from a staff standpoint, should come out of committee, and let you all respond and hopefully come to a final conclusion about what comes to TNT. So Meg.
All right, thank you, Keith. So as Keith said, you all requested that we speak to the businesses who might be impacted by the potential closure of this block on South Market, the one between Church and State. So what we did is we looked at a map and kind of identified a range of businesses that could be impacted. So we talked to people on Meeting Street, we talked to people on Church Street, North Market, South Market, State, all over the place. Ended up being about 78 places that we identified. We were able to get a response from about 56 of them. So the 2 charts here, this first one shows the people that we weren't able to speak to, which was only about 28%. The second chart just takes them out to show you an overview of how people felt. What we heard was an overwhelming support. As you can see, over half were in support of this effort. Got a few hard no's, to be completely transparent, of people who thought that the rerouting of traffic in particular would negatively impact their business. This was people especially on Church Street, which would, being able to turn on and off of South Market was a concern for them, as well as people on the eastern end of North Market were concerned about people getting all the way down to them, to their business. Some other things that we heard, people were excited about the idea of doing this. They were like, oh, we get to have our own second Sunday kind of feeling. There were also folks who were like, why can't we do this all the time and just close the entire market area to just pedestrians and carriages, was something that a few different businesses brought up. We also did not speak to any of the tour companies, specifically because we knew that their questions were going to be about their route, because closing that block of South Market is going to impact their route back to the stable. We did talk to the Livability and Tourism Department about that, who manage the carriages and their routes. There are alternative routes that they could take. There are concerns about those routes. Those streets are not used to that level of traffic. It also could put carriages on streets that they tend to try to avoid, like East Bay, because they're busier, cars tend to move faster, things like that. So just something to keep in mind that will need to be worked out. I also, while we were actually out there talking to people on Friday, the market management company made a decision that they felt that it was not safe to have people actually walking through the market sheds. So starting on Saturday, they have closed the interior of the market and have actually opened up the side on North Market, where there are already some bollards between the building and the street, and are actually vending to the street that way. That works for now because they only have about 50 of their vendors back. If they bring the rest, they are going to need this closure on the south side so that they're able to have the rest of the vendors come and sell there. The other thing that will need to be considered is times and schedules for these. We want to make sure that this is not preventing either the vendors in the market or the brick and mortars adjacent from getting the deliveries they need. So we would need to think about setting times so that people can coordinate appropriately. I think that covers everything. Keith, let me know what I forgot, and then I'm happy to take questions.
No, you covered it. And especially, I just want to emphasize, I mentioned this in the first presentation I gave to you all, that the examples we've seen from other cities, the open streets concepts have been specific days, there have been specific times. And so I do think part of our recommendation, I think there's agreement around South Street, but times and days I think are going to be an important aspect of that as well. I think let's take Alan, and then so he can go quickly through his stuff, and then allow the committee to discuss and finalize things.
Yeah, thanks, Keith. Thanks, Meg. Of the three areas that the committee recommended we all move forward on, Design Division and the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Design Subcommittee only tackled two of those. One of the ones we didn't work on was the Market Street closure, which, as you can see, is very well handled by Meg's team. We did talk about Wentworth Street. We just don't have enough information to determine whether or not that is a good candidate for us to pursue at the moment relative to the costs, benefits, and the complications around intersections and placing a cycle track at that location. And also given that it's not in the People Pedal plan. And so we didn't really get very far with Wentworth at the subcommittee level, and I can let Matt and Fatima and others talk about that, and David's part of that conversation. In the design division of the planning department, we also have not gotten very far on that either, simply because we have a tremendous number of competing projects, and it's difficult for us to determine that it's worth investing for a short-term COVID-19 relief at this time. We can have that conversation as we move forward. We really did make a lot of headway is on the parklets effort. And I can present our work on that right now. So what I'll be presenting is a quick PDF and then also a Word document. So it's a little bit boring, but I'll be walking you through a Word document very quickly. But the PDF kind of summarizes generally where we are. So the idea was to focus on temporary parklets as seating areas to allow adjacent businesses to convert their on-street parking spaces to outdoor seating areas. The idea there is that really want to focus on more urban locations, given that the footprints of the restaurants themselves, the patron use area is generally very tight. They need actual spatial relief in order to allow for safe social distancing. And that the on-street parking is really the only place to get that space, especially since a lot of the businesses that I'm describing are on sidewalks that are also very tight. So while we did a really good job, trying to relieve them from the normal constraints of sidewalk dining and facilitate that, a lot of folks just don't have the space on the sidewalk to even meet that. So there's a lot of reasons to be pursuing this as a coronavirus relief effort. So what are we talking about when we say parklets? So right now, Design Division is working on parklets at these two scales and timeframes. And what we mean by that is that we are working on a constructed parklet effort, which would involve an actual built structure in the parking lane that will be a platform that is level with the sidewalk, that comes along with structurally integrated barriers from the travel lane. That's not necessarily, I don't like to use the word permanent because it's not a permanent fixture, but it is a long-term constructed parklet. But that is not the main focus of this effort right now for the purposes of coronavirus relief. But I want to let you know that we are working on that. We've gotten a lot of headway. We brought some designers together. We've identified, areas of review that can be streamlined, and we're well underway and happy to talk more about that at a later time. We focused on the temporary parklets for tonight, and that's essentially, to be simple, it's tables and some chairs and some sufficient vertical separation or barriers in a parking space. It doesn't get much more complicated than that. And the way that we want to deliver this is to use our recent curbside parking as a template for how to administer this program. We're exploring other implementation tools to make sure that we're in keeping with our legal stipulations and other practices, but that's not really the main focus right now. The main focus is that we've got something to start with and we can build on it. So what are our recent actions? I mentioned an entire parklet study that we're doing. We had an advisory work session where we brought together some design professionals to try to help work through this. And the design subcommittee was last night. And there's been a lot of internal city collaboration on this. So again, what is the proposed process? We think we can get this done using our existing curbside relief efforts. And that would be sort of an administrative level kind of approval with oversight from the Director of Traffic and Transportation, administered by a handful of staff folks. And then the way that would work is it's not quite the honor system, but in order to expedite the development of the parklet, it would be a simple application process and a simple field check, something like that. That brings me into sort of the sponsorship aspect of this, is that this parklet really does need to be tied to an adjacent business. You really don't want there to be a parklet that's managed or sort of stewarded by someone who is not even on that block. So it really is about providing relief and direct relationship to that adjacent business. And again, I mentioned the TNT director oversight. We're really trying to look for ways that we can manage the program and give Keith and other city staff the discretion to decide when it's not working and when the plug maybe needs to be pulled on something that maybe isn't being maintained very well or doesn't follow the guidelines. And then we're also looking at how we might work with the Mayor's Design Review Committee on materials and whether that's even needed for this process. So still a lot more work to do on this, but there's some progress that's been made. We've got some limitations here. We're really going to have to focus on city streets at first. And as many of you know, a lot of the streets that we have on the peninsula, particularly some of our commercial streets, are controlled by SCDOT. At present, we feel that it's better to get a program off the ground and demonstrate some success, and then go to SCDOT to see if this can be expanded to state streets. So right now the focus is on city streets, simply because we know that's where we can get this done. And also on the peninsula, I mentioned the aspect of focusing on more urban sites, because they're the ones that really need this spatial relief, and the adjacent parking lane is the only place they can really get that spatial relief to serve outside. You're talking about, if you're talking about locations off the peninsula, typically those come along with surface parking lots and things like that. Now we might want to find some urban nodes out off of the peninsula that we could focus on, like Avondale or parts of Daniel Island, places like that. But we really, this program really isn't intended for, folks that have large surface parking lots and large patron use areas. We also decided at subcommittee last night to focus on streets that are posted, the speed limit is posted 25 miles per hour or slower. There's a lot of concern about moving vehicles and conflicts and potentially accidents associated with the parklets. Specifically, if you're talking about a temporary parklet where the vertical separation might not be as strong. And then also, we were really kind of limiting the application space to, so it's really one space per applicant. We would entertain, I think, if someone wanted to take on 2 spaces, they did do a second application, but really it's a 1-for-1 kind of thing right now. And then it's applicable to really only parking spaces. So that means that bicycle parking, commercial loading zones, bus stops, places like that really wouldn't be good candidates for parklets. So that also limits us to the spaces available. So as you can see, you start to whittle this down. Right now it's a narrow program, but again, once we get this off the ground, we can grow it after some demonstrated success. Requirements, it does need to be protected on all 3 sides. The image that I showed conveys that simply. We're having a discussion about the type of barriers that would be needed. Again, they need to be sufficient to deter a moving automobile and keep people safe. So we're working out those details. It needs to be sponsor maintained. So that means that, a restaurant, for example, would be the one to, control the furniture and make sure that's locked up, make sure the space is tidy, stuff like that. There has to be a steward associated with this for it to work. And no spillover would be allowed at present time. So you really don't want to have tables that are spilling over into a sight distance triangle or an adjacent parking lane or the street or even the sidewalk, particularly if you have narrow sidewalks. You really do want to contain all the activity in the parklet itself. And then again, I mentioned the single space per application. That's right now, that's the presentation. And then the document, the sort of working document that we have really just kind of spells all of that out. I won't repeat it, but we have a pretty clear process on how we think people should apply. A lot of notes in here about liability and maintenance that sponsor would occur as a part of this. So it's sort of an at-risk kind of effort. And then the minimal requirements for safety, some permitted elements that would be in the parklet, some things that would be prohibited that we don't think are safe to have. And some of this actually came from stormwater. We want to make sure that we're not blocking our drains with some of this temporary facilities. Operations for guidelines, again, keeping it clean, keeping it safe. The types of spaces that are available, we would consider some passenger loading or commercial loading, or we're trying to figure out exactly how that works, but it would all be handled at the staff level and the discretion of Keith, the Director of Traffic and Transportation. Again, more words on privatization of public space and sponsorship. So we've got something off the ground, and I'll ask anyone from the design subcommittee if they want to add anything.
Let me throw some things in before, and thank you, Megan, Alan. One, I believe Councilmember Seekins had to be on a council call, so I think Matt is chair. We wanted to make sure that we provided you, we colored in the lines for you all post the vote that y'all gave at the last meeting. One, so that you can verify that these are still recommendations that you want to move forward with, but also so that you can have a little bit more specificity as to what those recommendations look like from a time standpoint, day standpoint, implementation standpoint, and then before we leave this evening, getting a general idea of how best staff can coordinate with chair or others on making sure that you all's voice is clear, the committee's voice is clear when you all present to the TNT committee.
This is Matt. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, Meg, for this incredible work. Is there anybody, first question, is there anybody that doesn't think we should move forward with this concept of temporary parklets or South Market Street, open street concept? Okay, so hearing none. Keith, do you have a most efficient recommended path forward in terms of implementing both of these items?
So the South Market option is not going to be too much of a heavy lift. I mean, we have the prerequisite barricades, and otherwise that can be put up. Unfortunately, they're very utilitarian, in nature. But because I want to do my best to put us in a position where we're not dependent on CPD having to participate in any street closures, just want to do our due diligence to be able to make that happen on our end. So the clarity around days and times is going to be essential for us, because that means me forcing the use of my capacity and probably pulling on public service capacity for what that would look like. I prefer not to be in a position where we have to lean on CPD or pay off-duty cops and that type of thing for what that looks like. In terms of the parklet situation, I think the big aspect of there's a couple aspects that we have ideas about, but want to be able to make sure we iron out. One is the design detail piece, and the suggestion, and Alan and his team have some suggestions around that, about what are the barriers, protective barriers around those parking spaces, even though it's on city streets, and we'll be able to say what we want from that. The spectrum of parklets is so wide. There's people who put fake turf down and beach chairs, and that's technically a parklet. But that may not meet the standard of what we want to see in the public right of way. And so the specificity around that is important. The one piece that we did struggle with was because we're giving this to individual businesses, you know, there's going to be an assumption that that's an extension of their business space, even though that's public right of way. A lot of cities that have introduced parklets in a permanent capacity make it clear that they're public space. This is different. This is an emergency situation. Folk need it. Folk need to expand. So this is a different type of situation. If the full street was closed down, we'd be allowing folk to have their tables and chairs out and not be having that conversation in public versus private space. But I do want to make that piece clear because I don't know if that question would come up during the council discussion. And then the other space is just making sure we check the box on liability, but because of the work that happened with the street furniture and also the private lots that was implemented just a couple months ago, we feel like this can follow that pathway where within the application process, that entity checks that box, making it clear that it's their responsibility and otherwise on that part. The only other piece I want to reemphasize on the South Street piece that Meg mentioned was just being able to prepare to respond to whatever the pushback may or may not be from the tour folk who have their own routes and things like that. So sorry, I was a little bit all over the place on that, but those are just the flag pieces there of consideration.
Well, so in other words, thanks for that. Knowing that the committee would prefer city staff to move forward with this, do you recommend we make a motion to bring this forward to TNT pending further development or refinement, or do we need to draft a memo or resolution type of document?
I think there does need to be a memo from the committee just iterating you all's clear position, where you all stand, why you stand on that, and what benefit these two options will be. And I don't want to put words in the committee's mouth, but I'm assuming be as a jump start to what can be down the line, right? That this is not be all end all, but this is an opportunity to do a little bit of show and tell. Again, I don't want to say that I'm speaking for the committee. Y'all might have different views on that, but I think the memo will be important. I have a little bit of trepidation about giving too much detail, physical detail, to the council, just because then that's all public information and people can interpret that however they want, even as we're trying to work through the hows. That being said, the beauty of the on-street furniture piece and the private lots was once it went to council, once it got approved by council, it was a plug and play for us as staff. So there is some due diligence we probably need to do on our side just to make sure things are ready to go. So if and when TNT says yes, council says yes, you know, people are going to expect South Street is going to be closed off the next day, you know, or whatever that time frame is. You know, people are going to expect to be able to send in their application for a parklet. So we do know that there's going to need to be some coordination to make sure we're ready if and when council says yes to roll that piece out. But to answer your question directly, I do think there needs to be a statement from the committee and also representation at our TNT committee meeting, iterating you all's recommendation, why that recommendation is the case, and what that will look like. What we've tried to do as staff is try to prepare you all and do a lot of the background work to add in from there.
Everyone, I'm sorry, I hate to jump in. I unfortunately have a client meeting in about 4 minutes, but I wanted to thank not only our speakers, but the rest of the committee for your diligence and for being gentle with me today. Tech was not my friend. But before I go, I just wanted to, again, thank the speakers, the committee, and I wanted to reiterate what you just said, Keith. I think what we said about a statement is sort of kind of what we were referring to, if I'm correct, Mariana brought up in our last meeting, just something, a guiding statement, maybe not too many details as we move forward, but a guiding statement to the committee on what we would like to see, what we would like to see implemented. I believe there were a couple of other things that we had discussed before, but I'm sure that my fellow colleagues will bring that up. Please forgive me as I must transition to my next event. I apologize. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
I have a couple of questions, and these might be for the design subcommittee, but one, did you all talk about for parklets, if a business that's on a, sorry, my cat really wants to be at this meeting. If there's a business on a state-owned street that wants to utilize a parking space on a side street that's very close to them, can they do that? Can they apply to do that?
We did not talk about that, but that's a great point.
I'm not necessarily, I'll say off the cuff, I'm not necessarily against that. Just, again, it just goes back to the usage of the space, what they're going to be using it for, and the maintenance of that responsibility. Yeah, I do think there needs to be some guide rails. We just did that with Husk today, Meg, and some other places that with the curbside parking piece that have made requests of things that they need, but they just don't meet the parameters. So I do think we have to have some level of guide rails around that. I think we also need to do proof of concept too. You know, if we do parklets on state-owned roads, they're going to have stipulations about the level of impact of the barriers that block that parking space, which would point towards something, I don't want to use the word permanent to Alan's point, but something of a more sturdy structure than something that's kind of temporary in nature and more tactical, on the side of tactical urbanism. And so that's the hill that's not a quick do, not a quick implementation opportunity. That's something that is going to take some negotiation time, and that's the piece that we struggled with as staff. Of people are asking for something right now, and implementation right now, and not 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. And if we go with the state-owned right-of-way process, then we're talking about a process, and we're not talking about an immediate implementation opportunity. So that's where we talked about from a staff standpoint. Obviously, the will of the committee is the will of the committee. We wanted to make sure we responded to you all.
I was, to be clear, I was asking about side streets that are city-owned, that a business on a state-owned street could utilize.
Yeah, and that's why I said I think it's on a case-to-case basis. I don't have an immediate no to that. But if somebody is on King Street and they want the tail end of Radcliffe as a location, and they're, I don't want to name businesses, so I'm trying to step. But what is that distance? What does that look like? Where is that at? What are the parameters around what's allowed and what's not? I think that's the piece we'd have to be really specific about.
My other question is for Market Street, what are the downsides to letting horse carriages continue through? They're very slow moving. Is it the cleaning up after them? Is it that issue?
Keith, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but it's more of a logistical issue. So if you have a barricade up, that keeps the cars and the carriages out. If you're going to let the carriages through, you kind of need a human there to moderate the opening and closure.
So somebody who works for the carriage companies?
Or the city, probably.
I would have to be the city. I would have to have somebody out there for the duration of that time doing that. I also, if and when the market does get its higher numbers of vendors and wants to use the South area, then how is that negotiated too? So I think those are the two pieces that came up for us. And again, it's not any shade or whatever that is, it's just preference. I prefer not to have a dependency on CPD in order to get the street closure done.
David?
Sorry, going back to the first question from Katie, I think that's reasonable, but I think one thing we probably should have in the document is that the business that sits right in front of that parking space probably should have right of first refusal. I mean, you'd hate for somebody who just didn't think about it and their neighbor came in and applied earlier and then they're getting the parking space, or around the corner and they're getting it. So I truthfully think the business that is closest to the parking space probably should have the right of first refusal for it.
And if we follow in on the same line as have we done the curbside pickup and drop off locations, the idea around that was being an immediate access to that business. And so I think there might be one that has a little bit of distance away from its actual business location, but for the vast majority of the almost 70 or so locations, it's in immediate proximity to that business. So I think that's a piece that's important there.
One additional idea that I meant to mention yesterday, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but is the potential for having sort of a set of dates that people would apply within, almost doing it in batches. Then maybe there's a first batch, second batch, and that way the city might understand the quantity of businesses that are applying to do this at any one time, and maybe can manage the location of these temporary parklets. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but it might be worth considering. So in terms of getting the quickest path forward to completion, Keith, I mean, should we just circulate a memo among the group electronically?
Yeah, I'll throw out this option here, and y'all can respond, and city staff too. That there is a memo from the committee, whether that's circulated or otherwise. I do think that what has been written up from the design, civic design on the parameters of parklets, having that, Matt, maybe you getting a chance to review that based off of input from everybody. And that being the one of the addendums to the memo, so that they have a sense of what parklets are, what that opportunity is, and what the parameters of implementation would be for that. For the South Street option, maybe, and I saw that Morgan was on, maybe a simple diagram of what that closure area would look like, just so they have a visual of that as a reference piece. And then I think that would be enough for between the memo, the diagram, and also the write-up regarding parklets, that would be enough of a baseline for the committee to have an idea of what's being proposed and how that would be implemented, and what that could look like from there. I do think that the memo should emphasize, again, the fact that this would be a start, that the clear benefit to the businesses and response to COVID-19. Yeah, I think both of those points are going to be important. But that's where my head is at. Y'all feel free to amend or change as you see fit.
When is the next TT meeting, Keith?
I gotta go back in my schedule.
I'm sure you've mentioned it before, I'm sorry.
Next council meeting. Now we have 2 in July too. So if you all feel the next one coming up is too quick, let me know. But the first one is July 14th. And then the following one is July 28th.
I think we can get it done by then.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we need to.
So can we get on that agenda?
Yeah, we have that TNT meeting is going to be packed. So yes, that we have to have we're going to have a TNT meeting anyway for that July meeting. So you will be on the schedule.
Is there anybody itching to write this memo? If not, I'm happy to do it. Okay.
I'm happy to help. I'm happy to edit.
Okay. Why don't we go back and
bring it to me, and then we can send it so it's not too many chefs. Or if anybody wants to email Matt individual ideas as you get started.
And then what we can do on our side is, Meg, Allen, let's huddle in the coming days. My schedule is crazy, but I'll figure it out. And just talk through the guiding document on the parklet piece. And anything else. I really like the mapping you did, Meg, about the businesses and the surveying that was done, probably being a part of the addendum piece with the mapping of the South Street piece, just to say that the due diligence was done, just in case somebody tries to pull that out of the back pocket. But yeah, we could do our due diligence there and then merge the two, Matt, if that's okay.
Is there a way to email those documents? I know they're even in draft form, but just so we can reference that as we're creating the memo.
Yes,
Alan
ma'am.
and Meg. Yeah.
Okay. And make sure Mariana, Fatima, Steve, anything that we're missing, I see people's heads still thinking, so just want to
Now,
make
Keith,
sure.
I mean, my big concern, I mean, you addressed it, and that was my big point. I just want to make sure that we're moving expeditiously, that we want to relay that urgency to the TNT committee, and the point about this being the beginning, and that we would like the opportunity to bring up more of these opportunities in front of the TNT committee if they would be open to that. So, you know, and the urgency being around, you know, as Alan said, and you, Keith, around the fact that this is an emergency situation. This is not something that we're looking to implement 6 months, 8 months, 12 months down the road.
Should it, to make it easier to expand on this, would it make sense for the memo to include a framework for what we might want to include in the future?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, Steve. I mean, I think I think Katie, you shared the document that we had kind of drafted up originally that perhaps could be used as a starting point for the memo.
Yeah. And I would emphasize, and I'm happy to help with this memo as well. But I would also emphasize the fact that getting prepared now with these things as we're, I mean, what are we on? We're still on the top of the bell curve with the first wave of COVID. So we're going to have to deal with all of this again in a few months. So we might as well get these pilot projects under our belts now and be prepared to assist the city with emergency situations going forward, getting this groundwork laid.
Yeah, good point.
Keith, just to verify, I'm assuming that we can share our draft memo with your staff or you prior to that meeting?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And also, I would need it prior to the meeting anyway, because I would want it to be a part of the documentation that goes to the committee for the review prior, similar to the for those who weren't a part of the committee, similar to the memo that was done for budget. They got that as a part of their packet ahead of time.
And they get that packet a week in advance?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Keith, if we're working on this memo outside of regularly scheduled BPAC, is there any notification or anything we need to do just to be responsible to our public obligations?
As long as there isn't as long as it's not in the form of as long as there's not quorum. As long as there's not quorum. If there's quorum, then we need to make sure there's notification. If it's done in a subcommittee form, there's not a public notification in that regard for subcommittees. But yeah, it's more about making sure there's not. If you all have quorum, then we have to make sure we do our due diligence with the public.
Well, we should be able to share it electronically and get there. Okay. Well, anybody have anything else to add?
Can I
just one thing?
Oh, sorry.
I know you're good.
Well, I was just going to say, speaking of, because you mentioned quorum, is there any way that we can all get an emailed list of all of the current BPAC members and what subcommittees they sit on? I don't know that we have that living anywhere, and it would be great to know. Like for instance, today I don't know how many people are absent. I don't have any concept of that. So it would be cool if we could all get those documents.
Okay.
I agree. We were talking about how we got all these new members just as right before COVID started with this pandemic. So it would be great, I think, if we could both get a list of who all the members are and maybe open up the subcommittees to whoever wants to join. And obviously we don't want them too lopsided where one committee has everybody and, you know, the others don't have anyone. But if we could open it up to people just volunteering to be out and serve on them and see where it falls, see who ends up in what committee. I think
Do we
that'd
need
be
a
great.
motion for that?
I think we would, because you all voted on the creation of those committees. There's also people currently serving on all those different committees. So yeah, I think, Mr. Chair, it would be helpful if it's via motion.
We have the question is, well, I guess my first question in response is, Keith, does everybody already have an assigned committee, or are there still openings?
Everybody does have assigned committees. When I sat with Steve, you asked me to be on finance or design. So I think I added you to emails, but I can send out the list, Katie, that I sent you a couple weeks ago, and send that out to everybody if that needs to change, or otherwise I have no problem doing that.
Have there been
The
emails
list
sent
goes
out?
I think
about
that list seemed like it was missing somebody. I don't know if I thought the design committee wasn't as fulsome as it would have normally been. So if the list goes out, we can all take a look and then decide if it's fine the way it is.
Yes, ma'am. I will send it shortly.
So maybe we should just start there and then take action next meeting. Because I know we're missing Rusty still. So there's still one absence on the grade.
Rusty is in Columbia.
Right.
He and his wife have moved to Columbia. But I will send that list out in a couple minutes. Dre, you were about to say something. You got.
Well, has anybody running or had any conversations or emails about the finance subcommittee? I know I'm on that, but I haven't. I'm just making sure I'm not missing anything, any meetings.
I have not gotten a request for that subcommittee to meet.
Okay.
Email I sent, but happy to convene that as need be.
I sent an email out after I had asked Keith for what the current list was of all the subcommittees and sent it to who was on that list. But I think the folks who responded didn't have time to meet yet. So I just sort of stopped and sat back and figured we'd wait.
Okay, yeah, just making sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, I'm like, who's driving this? Am I? Okay, great, thanks a ton.
Okay.
And I'm going to say one final thing, and I don't know if this is going to go nowhere, but considering the fact that this COVID pandemic does not have an end in sight, and I know Councilman Seekings wanted to hold off voting for a vice chair until we had a face-to-face meeting. That may not occur in 2020. So I want to bring that out. Does anyone feel that perhaps we should put out a vote or have people nominate themselves for vice chair in the interim while we're Zoom meeting?
I agree.
What does that person do?
So per the ordinance, they would be subbing for the co-chairs. Per the ordinance, there's a chair from council, and then also a community member chair. So that's Councilmember Seekings and Matt. And then the vice chair would be in place in case they need to occupy that chairman space and also be of assistance with coordination with the subcommittees.
Be of assistance with what?
Subcommittees.
So Keith, can we just make sure on the next agenda for the next meeting that we take nominations for the vice chair?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
That was
correct.
Right.
Any further
Dun,
comments?
dun, dun.
Any further comments?
I'm just excited. I just wanted to say I think it's really cool. I'm super pumped. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Meg. Thanks, Alan. Thanks, everybody. It's just neat to see things that look like something actually might happen. So I'm feeling good.
Yeah, I agree. I think Meg did an awesome job with that survey. Really amazing. And Alan did an amazing job with just pulling together this proposal really quickly based on that New York City model. I thought it was great. You did a lot of great work.
I will step a little bit out of bounds. I'll slide over this way and say, as committee members, as community members, as residents of the Charleston, you always have the opportunity to speak with our council. If you all as a committee really believe that the recommendations that are being put forward are things not only to just jumpstart, but things that should be prioritized, making sure you're having those conversations with the members that are going to be voting on this. You should feel that liberty, because that's where the green light or the red light will come from.
We seem to have a council now that will listen to ideas like this. So I agree with everyone that trying to get some language in this memo about what the long-term goal is for parklets. How we introduce that language, I'm not sure, but I'm sure we can squeak something in there to help Alan and his team further down the road. Okay, so that, everybody, thank you very much. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion.
Anybody second? Okay. All right. I think that's a meeting.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
Thanks everyone. See you next time.